The IS-2 and the D-25T, the most powerful tank gun of the Second World War. In my opinion, it was the 122mm D-25T gun that made the IS-2 one of the most dangerous heavy tanks of the Second World War. Despite constant debates about its rate of fire and separate loading ammunition, real wartime documents, firing trials, and combat reports show that the Soviet heavy tank possessed enormous firepower and remained an extremely dangerous opponent even for the best German armored vehicles. The main weapon of the IS-2 was the 122mm D-25T gun, a tank version of the A-19 Core gun of 1931 and 1937 design. The weapon was mounted on trunnions inside the turret and was fully balanced. However, the turret itself was not perfectly balanced. The reason was simple. The turret had originally been designed for the smaller 85mm D5T gun. Once the much longer and heavier D-25T was installed, the center of mass shifted, making turret rotation more difficult when the tank was positioned on uneven ground or at an angle. The gun had vertical elevation angles from -3 to +20 degrees. With the turret fixed in place, the weapon could still be adjusted slightly using a small horizontal fine-aiming sector. The gun could be fired using either an electric or a manual trigger system. The first 101 production tanks received a piston breech version of the gun. In practice, this system proved inconvenient. During testing, the average rate of fire was only about 1 to 1.5 rounds per minute. These early guns also used a muzzle brake similar to the one installed on the German Ferdinand tank destroyer. Later production IS-2s received a wedge breech mechanism. This greatly improved the loader's work and roughly doubled the practical rate of fire. Even so, the D-25T remained a massive gun with separate loading ammunition. The loader first had to insert a 25-kilogram shell into the breech, followed by a separate 15-kilogram cartridge case containing the propellant charge. The IS-2 carried only 28 rounds of ammunition. Shells and charges were stored both inside the turret and along the sides of the fighting compartment. The main ammunition types included the armor-piercing tracer Pz.IV, weighing 25 kilograms, the blunt-nosed armor-piercing Pz.IV with a ballistic cap, the high-explosive fragmentation OF-471, weighing 25 kilograms. The OF-471 shell contained almost 3 kilograms of explosive filler, either TNT or Amatol. All ammunition used the full GF-471 charge, producing a muzzle velocity of approximately 792 to 800 meters per second. Secondary armament included 3 7.62mm DT machine guns, 1 hull-mounted, 1 coaxial with the main gun, and 1 mounted in the rear of the turret. The total ammunition supply for the machine guns was 2,520 rounds. Beginning in January 1945, IS-2 tanks also began receiving the 12.7mm DShK anti-aircraft machine gun equipped with a K8T collimator sight. The installation of the DShK was officially approved by State Defense Committee Decree No. 6723 on October 14, 1944. In my opinion, the greatest strength of the IS-2 was its firepower. The 122mm D-25T was the most powerful mass-produced tank gun of the Second World War. Its muzzle energy reached approximately 820 ton-meters. For comparison, the German 88mm KVK-43 gun of the King Tiger produced about 520 ton-meters. The KVK-36 of the Tiger I produced around 368 ton-meters, while the 75mm KVK-42 gun of the Panther produced approximately 205 ton-meters. Yes, German armor-piercing ammunition was often manufactured to a higher standard. German tanks also widely used sub-caliber and shaped charge ammunition. Until 1945, the D-25T mainly relied on the standard BR-471 armor-piercing shell. Nevertheless, The gun's actual performance during testing was extremely impressive. Armor penetration. The BR-471B shell was capable of penetrating up to 152 millimeters of armor at 500 meters, approximately 142 millimeters at 1,000 meters, around 133 millimeters at 1,500 meters, and roughly 122 millimeters at 2,000 meters. The standard BR-471 shell penetrated approximately 155 millimeters at 500 meters, 143 millimeters at 1,000 meters, 132 millimeters at 1,500 meters, and about 116 millimeters at 2,000 meters. It is important to remember that Soviet armor penetration calculations differed from German methodology. However, the most interesting results came from live-fire tests against captured German vehicles. During testing, the Panther-IV Aus-IH was penetrated completely through both the frontal and rear armor plates. Hits against the Panther caused massive breaches and cracked weld seams. In some cases, hits to the turret penetrated through both sides, and the turret itself could even be torn from the turret ring. The Tiger I suffered catastrophic internal damage after being hit by 122mm shells. In one test, the shell traveled through the entire tank and ripped off the rear armor plate. Even the heavy Ferdinand tank destroyer, though not fully penetrated from the front, suffered major structural damage when the shell smashed through the first 100mm armor plate. Particularly important were the Kubinka firing trials against the King Tiger in November 1944. According to Soviet reports, the 122mm armor-piercing shell of the D-25T was capable of penetrating the upper frontal plate of the King Tiger at approximately 600 meters. Meanwhile, the King Tiger's own 88mm KVK-43 gun failed to penetrate that same armor plate even at 400 meters. But the greatest advantage of the D-25T was not only armor penetration, high explosive power. The 122mm high explosive shell possessed enormous destructive force. Even without penetrating armor, the impact could destroy weld seams, disable the transmission, damage internal components, jam or even tear the turret from the turret ring. During the Kubinka tests, hits from the OF-471 shell against the King Tiger damaged transmission components and cracked the frontal weld seams. In terms of pure explosive effect, the Soviet 122mm shell greatly surpassed the German 88mm high explosive round. The Soviet shell weighed 25 kilograms and contained around 3 kilograms of explosive filler. The German shell weighed approximately 9.5 kilograms and carried roughly 1 kilogram of amytal. In my opinion, it was this combination of enormous kinetic energy and devastating explosive power that made the D-25T such a dangerous weapon. Rate of fire and loader workload. The main criticism of the D-25T has always been its relatively low rate of fire. Even an experienced loader required around 20 seconds to complete a full loading cycle. First, the 25-kilogram projectile had to be loaded and rammed into the breech. Then the separate 15-kilogram propellant case had to be inserted afterward. Most of these operations were performed inside a cramped turret, often using only the loader's left hand. During Kubinka trials, while moving at 12 kilometers per hour, the IS-2 achieved a practical combat rate of fire of approximately 1.35 rounds per minute. For comparison, German Tigers with more spacious interiors and single-piece ammunition could achieve approximately 6 to 8 rounds per minute. However, in my opinion, comparing the IS-2 and German heavy tanks purely by rate of fire is misleading. The IS-2 was not designed for prolonged rapid-fire duels. Its purpose was to destroy enemy tanks with 1 or 2 devastating hits. Accuracy and dispersion. There is a common myth that the D-25T was inaccurate. Soviet firing trials do not support this claim. At 1,000 meters, the average dispersion of the 122mm armor-piercing shell was 170mm vertically and 270mm horizontally. For comparison, The German 88mm KVK-43 showed 200mm vertically and 180mm horizontally. This means that the Soviet gun actually demonstrated better vertical accuracy than the German weapon, while losing only in horizontal dispersion. Trials at Kubinka also demonstrated impressive accuracy while firing on the move. At approximately 700 meters, the IS-2 scored 4 hits out of 5 against a Panther, and 2 hits out of 3 against a Panther III. Turret traverse speed ranged from 13 to 16 degrees per second, meaning a full turret rotation required roughly 22 to 28 seconds. In my opinion, real wartime documents and test results completely destroy the myth that the D-25T was somehow ineffective. The official report of the Red Army Self-Propelled Artillery Directorate stated, "The installation of 122mm guns on IS tanks restored our superiority over the enemy in the artillery armament of heavy tanks." In terms of shot power, the 122mm D-25 gun far surpassed the 88mm guns of German tanks. The same report also stated, "Combat operations involving IS tanks showed that 122mm guns were the most effective means of fighting enemy heavy and medium tanks, ensuring armor penetration at distances up to 2,500 meters." Another report from the 71st Independent Guards Heavy Tank Regiment concluded, "The firepower of the IS-122 is the most powerful among all existing tank types. The 122mm shell possesses enormous penetrating capability, making these tanks the best means of combating enemy heavy tanks." That is why, in my opinion, the D-25T was not simply a good gun. It was one of the most powerful and effective tank weapons of the entire Second World War.